From the north side of the San Francisco Bay to Singapore, welcome to Urban X Real Talk Fitness Radio with your host, business owner, lecturer, author, master trainer, Tiaja. With over 30 years of experience in the health and fitness industry, he will challenge the fitness between your ears. So prepare your mind, body, and soul for the revolution of self-care, the evolution of fit, with real talk about real people, real health, real fitness, and the real deal behind our present illness culture. Real talk every time, all the time. Get weekly insights on how to shift your thinking, emoting, eating, training, hydrating, goal setting, and resting for you, the everyday athlete. You can cheat your fitness, but you can't steal your health flow. It's Tuesday, 9 a.m. Let's flow.
Welcome to our next Real Talk Fitness Radio, where we challenge the fitness between your ears. I'm your host, Tiaja. Sarah was diagnosed with cancer when her son was 11 years old, but she had absolutely no symptoms. See, there was nothing to indicate that she was even sick at all. She went from being a healthy, middle-aged woman to a cancer patient virtually overnight and was rushed in for treatment before she had time to think about it. As soon as she received surgery and radiation and chemotherapy, her health got dramatically worse. These so-called treatments left her in agonizing pain, unable to walk, talk, or eat solid food until her death a couple of months later. For most of his life, her son has sought out the truth. Did his mom really die of cancer, or did the treatments kill her? This is the question far too many people are left with, particularly after a loved one is treated for cancer. As I mentioned last week, it is estimated that 1 in 4 Americans will contract cancer within their lifetimes, and the numbers are even more sobering for women, where the incidence is 1 in 3. Fact is, some 38 million deaths occur every year worldwide from non-communicable diseases like cancer and cardiovascular disease. And the outlook can be downright scary when you factor in the mechanistic thinking of conventional medicine, which tells us our bodies become weaker and thus more susceptible to diseases like cancer as we age, as if we're subject to the thermodynamic laws of entropy, like old machines. We're not. However, there's little doubt that recovering from life-altering events like serious injury becomes more challenging as we age, but I'm not so sure I believe that we become weaker or that our immune systems become less efficient as a result of aging. Let's face it, there are numerous variables that determine your biological age versus your chronological one, a healthy body versus a diseased one. Inarguably, what we put into our bodies relative to what we eat plays a significant part in our overall health and our body's sustainability. When the Greek philosopher Hippocrates, who was considered by many the father of modern medicine, said some 4,000 years ago, "Let thy food be medicine and medicine be thy food," he was speaking directly to the pharmacological effect food has on the health of the human body. Since food as medicine is ancient wisdom, then why is Western medicine just beginning to embrace its importance? See, the ancient Chinese, the East Indians, and Native Americans and African cultures have used food medicinally for millennia, so why, with all its technological advancements, medical wonders, and miracles, has the Western world, particularly the United States, been so recalcitrant in embracing what is clearly no more than a common sense approach to disease? After all, most of the diseases modern man is afflicted with are self-inflicted, meaning we have created technologies which work against our health by subsequently destroying the health of soils with overcrop rotation and monocrops. Why has the West placed profit over people, and how can we restore the balance? Well, the long and short answer is it will be challenging, but not impossible. If we maintain a modicum of control over what we put into our bodies, there remains a fighting chance for us to right this sinking ship. The truth is, cancer is more common to us than the so-called common cold, which is to say, throughout our lifetimes, we have cancer cells growing in our bodies, yet under normal circumstances, our body's immunity is strong enough to kill the cancer cells before they become reprobate or malignant. I want you to think about this. When our bodies are working at optimum levels, a process called angiogenesis is suppressed in cancer cells. Now, I discussed this in detail last week, but let me offer this reminder. Angiogenesis is responsible for the formation of blood vessels vessels and capillaries which transport oxygen and nutrients to our cells. According to Dr. William Lee, if we are then able to suppress angiogenesis from naturally occurring in cancer cells, then we can starve cancer. Now, the only problem with this theory is that it wrestles the power of choice away from the medical community and restores it where it belongs, and that is to us. The fact that it requires personal responsibility and vigilance perhaps is its greatest hurdle. Today will be just another day unless you decide it won't be. It is Tuesday, October 29, 2019. Let's flow.
We've actually spent the body of the day, speaking about the importance of diet in combating disease. And indeed, that's really where most of our focus naturally is within a health system and as medical doctors, is actually how do we actually conquer disease. I have the privilege of being able to lead an initiative in my organization called the Health Expedition to ask a related question, but looking at it from the other side, which is how do we normally stay healthy? How come we actually don't get sick more often? So for example, if I told you that we know that cancer is caused by mutations in our DNA, but what if I told you that we now know that every single one of us here in the room has 10,000 mutations that occur every day naturally in our bodies? So why don't we have cancer tomorrow? How come we don't all have cancer tomorrow? What is it about our bodies that protects us against that problem? We know that bacteria can be deadly. And we also know that we need to have good sanitation. And we also know, as you've heard, the microbiome, the healthy gut bacteria, is really important. So we have 37 trillion healthy bacteria in our gut. So we are infected, but we're not sick. How come? And what if I told you that within the last 2 years, we've actually discovered 2 new organs in the human body? After all these years, the mesentery has now been recognized as one organ, and then the interstitium, which is the space between organs, is also a new superhighway of information that's also considered an organ. And then what if I told you just about 4 weeks ago, we discovered a new brain cell in humans called the rosebud neuron. This actually underscores just how much we still have yet to learn about how our bodies actually work. And the argument that I'm going to make, the case I'm going to make, in order to truly understand how we can actually eat to beat disease and to protect our health, it's not only about the food, it's about how our bodies actually work and respond to the food. So that's really what I want to talk about. And I'm going to start with just sort of a few statistics. The planet is getting more crowded and it's getting older, with 7.6 billion people as of this weekend. And we're supported by this thin blue line around the planet. That's it, and all the resources that we actually have. As you heard earlier today, the consumption of agricultural products can actually impact severely on our planet. We have a responsibility as a group, as a community, to really help preserve our planet. And in preserving our planet, what's good for the planet is also good for our bodies, as you've actually heard before. So at the World Health Organization and at the United Nations, there is a recognition that one of the things that unites us is really disease, because there are these non-communicable diseases like cardiovascular disease that you've heard of, and cancer, and diabetes, and obesity. That this is sort of, unfortunately, one of the great unions that links people together, is that we share these diseases. And certainly cardiovascular disease, as we've heard so much about in the last few talks, is really a major burden for us, and therefore something we need to get on top of. Cancer is also another cause of death. I'm sure, I don't need to see a show of hands, but I know every single one of us in this room has been touched by cancer, either directly or with somebody who we know. Could be a family member, could be a neighbor, could be a child, but or a coworker, somebody we know. And if you take a look by the year 2030, the number of people that will die of cancer every year, 13 million. That's like wiping out the entire country of Sweden, the entire country of Belgium, and about half of Australia in a single year with cancer. So we need to really be able to think about whether or not there are ways of getting on top of that. You all know that there are on television these commercials to do genetic screening. And of course, there's also genetic screening for cancer. And there are some cancers that in fact are able to be detected with genomic screening. Only about 10% or less. Actually, most of it of cancer is due to the environment. And so the interesting thing is, of the environmental causes, about a third are linked to our diet. As you heard earlier, bad dietary habits do cause disease. But I want to actually give you another way of thinking about our diet, which is that, what about the good parts of the diet? Are there ways that we can actually invert the negative model to turn our focus, turn our attention to the things that are actually good in our diet, as we've heard about, that can actually fight not only cancer but heart disease and other diseases as well? So I would say that this is where science comes into play. We didn't have, 50 years ago, the ability to look at the body, to look at our food in ways that we now actually have. We've got many more technologies, much more knowledge, and so this is allowing us to actually be at this turning point where we can cut and really get to the future by taking another path altogether. The reason that you are all here in this room, as well as my fellow speakers, is that we fundamentally believe that there is a better future ahead, and that better future is one that we actually play a role in making the decisions. So food, of course, is one of the things that we think about when it comes to disease prevention. You don't have to go very far to find a farmer's market, or if you're traveling abroad, going to a local town or village market to find an abundance of food that's out there. And obviously, if you go to health conferences like this, people are talking about their favorite foods. I think we all agree here there's no such thing as a true superfood. There's no magic bullet that actually is going to solve all of our problems, as much as we would like there to be. And so how do we actually reconcile our desire to find the magic answer with all the science that's emerging, and how do we then translate that into our everyday lives? And that's really what I want to actually share with you. The first thing you should know is that we are way beyond just listing our favorite foods and saying that they are actually the treatments for disease. As you've seen earlier, there are lists of different foods that we now know, and we're beginning to dive in to say, what is inside that food? What are the natural substances, whether it's fiber, whether it's a vitamin, whether it's an oil, whether it's another bioactive. So you can see here on the list of foods on the far left-hand column, a list of bioactives. So we're still discovering what the natural chemicals are in these foods. We are also beginning to use epidemiological studies, which is studies of the community, to find out what the outcomes of eating these foods are. And when you actually then look at the data, you can begin asking, what are the doses that have been calculated and to be associated with an outcome? This is not cause and effect. This is associations that allow us to ask other questions and have some ideas of where to go further. And I think Dr. Campbell's going to talk about that further. But the outcomes can be quite amazing. If you look on the far right-hand side of this table, you can see that there's decrease of some of the cancers that we care about: prostate cancer, breast cancer, kidney cancer, decrease in diabetes, even decrease in all-cause mortality. These are the types of studies that you can actually integrate into our collective knowledge base about food. My organization has been also asking some really interesting questions. In other words, can we go from our knowledge, our tools that we use to look at pharmaceuticals, and actually compare plants and foods to them? So we call this from farm or pharma to farm. And this is just a simple graph showing on the top black column the effect on blood vessels, healthy blood vessels, that drugs, which are seen in yellow and in blue, actually have in a test. It doesn't really matter what the exact test is, just assume, you can just take it for granted that I'm telling you that these are the different effects of different drugs, whether it's an antibiotic, whether it's a statin, whether it's a steroid, whether it's a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory agent. And then what's really interesting is that we can take the same tools that pharmaceutical companies use, as seen here, and begin testing foods side by side. And not surprisingly, you're seeing that some of the effects in these types of laboratory assays show you that the natural chemicals within foods can actually go head-to-head against some of the drugs. This is not actually impatience. This is actually taking a look at the natural power of what Mother Nature has loaded into the foods. And of course, many pharmaceutical products actually originally came from natural sources. And so when you hear about this concept of food as medicine, I want you to just remember that it's possible to use the tools of medicine to actually begin looking at food. That's really one of the areas that I think is going to explode into the future that we should be paying attention to. Now, I mentioned to you it's not just about the food. I mean, it is about the food, but it's really more about our bodies and how our body reacts to food, and everybody is a little bit different. This is a whole area of precision medicine. As you know, we're beginning to get away from thinking about cancer just as the organ that it's actually in, but we're beginning to look way down deep into the genomics, the DNA, the RNA, the protein, to kind of understand, to really kind of get into and peel apart the mysteries of the body. And that's really where my background is. I started in vascular biology. I work in oncology, cardiovascular disease, diabetes and its complications, vision. I've been involved with helping to bring about 32 FDA-approved medicines that have helped to shift the way that cancers are treated, that vision loss is treated, and also that diabetic wounds are healed. I think earlier somebody was saying they're the big fan of their toe. I know all about that. It's about how the body heals itself. But think about how the body does heal itself. And I want to challenge you to think about health in a completely different way. Normally, if somebody asks you what is health, you would say naturally that health is the absence of disease. I'm not sick, so therefore I'm healthy. And maybe that's one way to look at it, but I like to actually challenge you by saying that, no, actually health is not the absence of something. Health is a presence of defense systems that our bodies are hardwired with from the time we're born to the last breath we take. And these defense systems are firing on all cylinders at all times, when we're awake, when we're asleep, defending us against the bacteria that's in the air, those mutations that are happening in our body, the toxins that we inhale, the off-gassing chemicals that are in our homes, in our carpets, in our cars. You know, how many of you actually fill up your car at the filling station, and are you standing upstream or downstream? If you're standing downstream, you are breathing in those fumes, and your body has to defend itself. Your lungs have to defend themselves against those insults. And so, if you think about your body as a fortress, how do we think about our defenses? And from those defenses, what kind of clues can we get on how to use diet or to understand the role of diet? So, you know, a fortress, many of you will recognize castles. Castles are really fortresses, not just where, you know, royalty live. This is in England. This is in the town called Arundel. I've actually been there myself, and it looks beautiful. But if you actually take a look at how fortresses are designed for defense, it's really amazing. In addition to the moat, which is the part that goes around the outside, many of you may not know that the talus is actually that curve in the wall that people from the top used to drop boulders that would shatter in the bottom and send shrapnel to repel the enemy. With the spiral staircase always goes up in a clockwise fashion. And that's because when you're defending from the top, if you're right-handed, you can strike down, and if you're rushing from the bottom of the stairs and trying to swing up right-handed, you're at a disadvantage. That's a defense. And I did not know this myself, but most castles have something called a murder hole, which is right at the entrance. When people invade the castle, there's a giant hole right on top of the doorway that people can drop oil and rocks to try to, you know, repel the enemy. And so again, castles are these amazing structures that were part of the community, but they were designed to defend them. They were designed for defense. And so I want you to think about what we know about our body's defense systems. We are hardwired with, and I'm just going to show you 5 of them because these are the 5 that I'm working on right now. And these 5 are angiogenesis, which is our blood supply that brings oxygen and nutrients to every part of our body, every cell. Our stem cells, which actually help us regenerate. Our microbiome, which we've heard about already, our bacteria, our ability for our DNA to protect itself, and our immune system. And the amazing thing about these defense systems is they are standalone. Each one defends us against a number of diseases. I'm going to show them to you. But these are common denominator defense systems, and they support each other. if you take a look at Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, these are like these troops that are actually these divisions that actually all work together to defend the body. Now, I do want to come back to food. We're going to talk about food, obviously. And so when you see an apple growing on a tree, what you might not be thinking about is how over evolution, Mother Nature evolved those plants, the fruits, things that we eat, to be packed with natural chemicals that actually protect the plant. So what are those protecting? They're natural bioactive chemicals, and they often repel insects to prevent the insects from eating up the plant and destroying it. They are often colorful pigments that attract bees so that you can actually get pollination. This is sexual defense, for reproduction. So often the bioactives in foods that work in our bodies actually were originally evolved in the plants that we eat. We're talking about whole food, plant-based diets. They had a function originally in the plant. When we evolved as humans and picked those plants up and started to eat them, these natural chemicals suddenly had a new job. That new job is interacting with our human cells to do something new. And that's what we're discovering. And that's where the new science of how foods interact with our body is actually starting. All right, let me just give you a few examples of what we're learning, just to give you, inspire you to think about the foods that you eat, and actually the data you saw earlier in slightly different ways. Angiogenesis. This is a Greek word that's about the growth, how the body grows blood vessels. It's about the circulation. If we had good circulation, we are able to operate fine. If we have poor circulation, as you heard Dr. Esselton talk about, you have compromised blood flow, you can't walk very far, you got a problem. Or in the heart, you got a blockage. Your heart actually is starved of oxygen. On the other hand, blood vessels can be hijacked to have really deadly consequences. These are normal blood vessels under the microscope. You can see they all look different. The liver, they look like river tributaries for a river. In the lung, they're vessels pressed against air sacs. In the heart, they're really richly supplying the heart muscle. And along nerves, blood vessels are like telephone lines that course along nerves to keep the nerves alive. That's a special circulation that nerves actually have. Now, what's interesting is how the body keeps this natural balance. You don't want to have too many, you don't want to have too few, you want to have just the right amount. And so the body is able to grow more blood vessels when it needs better blood flow or after working out, exercise. There's a fitness stand back there, somebody or a trainer. You want to work out, you're going to build some muscle, you're going to actually need more blood vessels. The body can do that. And after it grows the blood vessels, if there's a lawnmower, kind of that mows back the lawn and prunes the blood vessels back to where you need to be, back for balance. If you don't have enough blood vessels, like after surgery or after injury, you need to grow new vessels back. Well, the body can do that too. We can actually grow more blood vessels to fill up that space, and that's actually what you see under a scab after you cut yourself. It's that red stuff. If you can't grow blood vessels or prune them back, that's when diseases start. When this defense system is compromised, you wind up having diseases. And the diseases are the ones that you can, we've talked about some of them. Too many blood vessels, you wind up having cancer, vision loss, and diabetes and aging, psoriasis, arthritis, endometriosis, Alzheimer's disease, obesity. Fat cells require blood vessels to grow. When you actually have not enough blood vessels, you can actually have coronary disease. You don't have enough bypasses, natural bypasses, or in a stroke after the blockage in the brain, you want more blood vessels to grow. Even hair loss, and I suppose it was a little prescient for me to put erectile dysfunction, since everybody seems to have an erectile dysfunction story. I will find a way to feather that in, but it's true. You don't have good enough nerves, those nerves don't have a good enough blood supply, as we've heard about. And so that's insufficient angiogenesis. We don't have the right balance. So, let's talk about the diseases that result when we have too many blood vessels. What can we actually do about those? So I'm going to start with cancers, because cancers are forming all the time in our body, but they will usually be inconsequential. They're about the size of the head of a ballpoint pen. They don't have a blood supply, so they'll actually disappear. Your immune system will take care of it. But when they actually are able to attract their own blood supply, recruit their own private blood supply, the blood vessels actually feed the cancer cells, and a tumor can grow. About 16,000 times in about 2 weeks, once a blood vessel starts feeding them. So it's a massive trigger for cancer growth. So there are now medicines that have been developed, or new strategies to cut off the blood supply to cancer. So the medicines exist. I gave my TED talk that you heard about actually is about using food to actually cut off the blood supply to cancer. So if you want to look in TED, it's, can we eat to starve cancer? And that's called anti-angiogenic therapy as a way of actually treating, preventing cancer, but also treating them as well. It's something that is being done in every oncologist's office. And my group helped to develop the tool to study how do you mow down those extra blood vessels to prevent them from causing harm. This is a eagle's eye view of a little ring that's of the big blood vessel, the aorta, that you heard about earlier. And those white little hairs that you see are actually those endothelial cells that you heard about. They're lining cells. When you grow them in a laboratory, they will naturally want to fan out because they want to go someplace if they're not in a body. And so this is what cancers do. They actually they spark these blood vessels to grow all over the place like in a starburst. Now, if you actually extract the bioactive genistein from soybeans and you put them into the system, look at how you shut down all those blood vessels that might be feeding a cancer. It's pretty interesting that genistein from soy actually can shut down blood vessels. So one of the interesting questions is, now isn't that a problem for cancer? Doesn't soy have these estrogens that actually are dangerous for people, women who are afraid of breast cancer? Turns out that's a complete urban legend, like so many things that are out there about food and health. Phytoestrogens are plant estrogens, and this is what they actually look like. All right, you don't have to memorize this, but here's what I want you to do now. This is what a human estrogen looks like. Do they look the same? They're completely different. And so actually the phytoestrogen from plants block the human estrogen receptor. It's kind of like a natural tamoxifen, in fact. And so the skeptic would say, well, okay, you're making that case, they look this different, but does this actually mean anything in real life? Because that's where it counts. This is now where you start taking a look at large epidemiological population studies. This was published in JAMA in 2009. This is the Shanghai Breast Cancer Survival Study, in which they enrolled 5,042 women with breast cancer. So this group would be the ones that would be hosed the most if they were actually going to be worse, their situation would be worsened. But what they found over 5 years? That if the women who ate soy had a 29% decrease in the risk of death during that period of time, and a 32% decrease in the risk of the cancer coming back if they had it surgically removed. This is the complete opposite of making breast cancer worse. This is helping patients who have breast cancer. And how much do you need to have? I mentioned something about dosing. When you go back and look at this paper and do the calculations, the amount of soy that you would need to take to get this result is 10 grams of soy protein a day. How much is 10 grams of soy protein a day? It's about the amount you'd find in 1 cup of soy milk. All right, not a lot, practical. And in Asia, if you have breast cancer, people don't freak out and say, don't eat soy. In fact, they feed you more soy. And so again, we have to think about the cultural relativism. We actually have soy in a lot of things that we eat. Not all of them are good, a lot of processed foods. But in Asia, if you think about the Asian diet, there's a lot of soy proteins that are actually commonly consumed. Now, here's 17 studies looking at breast cancer and soy associations. And you can see all the studies show that the balance of evidence suggests that soy actually helps improve breast cancer survival. It does not cause death from breast cancer. So again, this is the kind of evidence that is helpful, and I encourage all of you guys, when you're thinking about the evidence for food and health, it's all about the science, it's all about the evidence. We're just trying to figure out, we don't know all the answers, but we just need to see the data. I'm showing you the data because I think it's a useful way for you to have the information to make up your own minds. Tomatoes, they have lycopene. And so they have also been studied for their anti-angiogenic benefits because lycopene is anti-angiogenic. Well, that's interesting, but does it actually make a difference? Well, there have been some large studies called the Harvard Professionals Follow-Up Study involving 46,000 men that have been followed over 20 years, and it was found that consuming 2 to 3 cups of cooked tomato sauce was associated with a decreased risk of prostate cancer by about 30%. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody avoided prostate cancer, but there was clearly an association with a risk reduction associated with a food that contains a bioactive that we know stops one of the processes that drives cancer growth. So it makes sense. Our world is better when it makes sense. We're able to make decisions better when things make sense. And that's really what I think this is all about.